Okay, thank you. And we will start our second panel. And we'll get straight into the discussion as soon as possible. For panelists, I will ask each one of them to make a short introductory statement for 2 minutes, and then we'll start. But before we start, 2 years ago, in the very same building, the United Nations 70th General Assembly has passed a historic declaration and commitment for the 193 member states, which is namely the Sustainable Development Goals, later known as the Global Goals, which is right behind me. At the same year, the General Assembly declared that 2017 will be the International Year of Sustainable Tourism for Development. Both declaration and commitment have at the core of it is social inclusiveness and prosperity. If we take the first goal in the SDGs, which is eradication of poverty, eradication of poverty can come in many forms, but the heart of it is without jobs, we won't have people moving up the social and economic scale. Without any further ado, I will start introducing our distinguished panel. We have a wonderful panel today, a mix between and experiences between private and public sector, academia, and government, which I'm very privileged to moderate it. I'll start first with His Excellency, Dr. Walton Alfonso Webson. He's the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Antigua and Barbuda at the United Nations. Prior to becoming the Ambassador and Permanent Representative, he was the former Director of Perkins International, where his duties included managing the development of educational programs throughout the 5 global regions around the world where Perkins currently works. In addition, he had responsibility for the creation and management and staff development training for international organizations and governments in the field of services to the blind and visually impaired. Welcome to the panel, Ambassador. Our second guest is Brian Grimaldi. He is the Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel of NYC & Company, the official destination marketing organization for the city of New York. Then we have Daniela Foster, a Senior Director of Global Corporate Responsibility at Hilton Worldwide. And she has quite an interesting resume. She moved from government and diplomacy into the field of, where she was championing the field of public-private partnerships, into the global corporate responsibility and public engagement for private sector. Welcome, Daniela. And then we have Clark Stevens. He's the Director of Government Affairs and Strategic Partnership at Airbnb. Clark have worked both in government, where he served as the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security, as well as he worked as a chief spokesperson at the White House during the Obama administration. Tui Shortland, and I see Tui's business model is quite innovative. This is the first time I got encounter with an entrepreneur who is involved with the indigenous tourism, and that's probably a new term even for the tourism practitioner to use from a long time. And last but not least, Lynn Maynard. She is the Academic Director and a Clinical Associate Professor at the Jonathan M. Tisch Center for Hospitality and Tourism at the New York University. Without any further ado, we will have each of the panelists take 2 to 3 minutes to have an opening statement. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First, let me thank the organizers of this event for bringing us together to discuss a very important topic, and a topic for me where we have moved and need to continue to move the discussion on disability from rhetoric to action. So it's very important to me that we have picked a topic that can address goals that would move towards the achievement of the SDGs and the part that persons with disability hold within that. I also want to take the opportunity to wish all happy International Disability Day as it comes before us. It's a very exciting moment each time it comes around. Finally, Mr. Chairman, before I get into it, I have to apologize that I will have to run, so I would say a lot of controversial things and then I can leave. No, I won't. I have to leave early because I'm traveling early in the morning and I have to get back to my office to get a couple of things done. So my apologies for this. I wanted to make 3 quick points, to look at 3 quick things. One is, as introduced by the moderator, the social integration of vulnerability, such as we see faces youths, older persons, persons with disability, and indigenous people, are significant, that we have significant challenges that we must overcome if we are to achieve the SDGs. This is locked, of course, if we leave it untouched, we then do not address the question of poverty. I'll come back to that quickly. Then the question of full employment, or employment and decent work for all, which is another call within the social development agenda and another plea for persons with disability to find decent work in, again, addressing the question of poverty. And then I ask myself the question, and I'd like to explore very briefly the question of the factors that make communities inclusive and or an experience for a vacation enjoyable for persons with disabilities. Let me quickly begin with the first one. And I know the moderator says 2 minutes, but I will ask for another 2 minutes because I'm going to run. So often when I'm asked that question, when I'm asked to discuss living conditions where persons with disability, the circumstances, I begin by first reflecting on the need of not persons with disability, but anybody. What are the questions I ask? And I asked my wife last night. I said, when you are getting us ready for vacation, what are the questions you ask? Because it's the same questions I ask about if there's a person with disability. Of course, what is the climate? Where is the locality? What is the attraction there? How can we access them? And then, of course, what is the quality of service and how is the infrastructure into which we are going? These are questions that we all ask. And therefore, for persons with disability, these are questions we must ask and then examine those answers as we move forward to either define the vocation or to define the communities or cities into which we live. Communities must respond to we must respond to these questions if we are going to address the question. We have heard a lot from Habitat 3 for the need for decent housing and new communities, new cities, new urban environment cities. And those questions are central. Answering those questions above are central if we are going to change the paradigm and change the dynamics around the inclusion of persons with disabilities and bringing persons with disabilities into the global community so that we can live in cities like all other persons and participate in the activities of those cities. We must begin to answer those above and begin to address those in the light of making livelihood more meaningful and exciting. In view of all of that, we have to begin to change the question from just saying what is access for the person with disability. We have to think of not just the persons with disabilities as we do with youths. We have to think of families. We must include families within the context of where we are going to find to live or where we are going to vacation. Families are an integral part of that question and therefore must be an integral part of the answers. Persons with disabilities live with families, and it is within that context that all questions around disability should be looked at and answered. The question of accessibility. Often, accessibility is defined or reduced to a question only around physical structures. I think we have to think of accessibility in a broader bundle, a broader context of questions and information. We cannot simply say accessibility only around physical barriers and physical structures. We have to, as I say, rope accessibility into the social environment as well. We have to begin to look at the social structures in the communities, and that's why, as I said above, families are so important. We have to look at those social structures as part of the concept of access. So the concept of access must be broadened so that we can understand that, and that concept itself is inclusive. Moving quickly to the question of employment. I think the tourist industry is a great industry for tourist and service industry is a great industry for creating employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. For two reasons. One, the persons with disabilities, including persons who are older, is an enormous number of people. We've told that there are more than 1 billion persons with disabilities. That's a large market. Older persons with disabilities, especially the boomers as they get older, have more money than youths. It's a market, therefore, that you cannot leave out in sensible business thinking. So we have to begin to think, as we think of the environment that we are creating to attract a new kind of tourism, that this population has resources. And that this population, especially in the West, in the developed societies, has resources, and resources that can be spent to expand employment. Not only do they have economic resources, many have capacity that they can use towards the service industry and the broader tourist industry. So exploring that capacity is, to my mind, critical. And moving, that moves us into the question of addressing poverty. Well, if we are going to address the question of poverty, then we got to find meaningful work and employment. And I think the tourist industry is probably the industry with the largest opportunity for creating employment, because the industry has boundaries beyond one type of operation. Your opportunities for work in the tourist industry can move from self-employment to employment within a larger chain of hotels, etc. And therefore, the opportunities that can be created for persons with disabilities is unlimited if given the chance. I want to end there, being mindful of the time, and I wish we had the opportunity to explore some of these thoughts. But I want to end by saying I think on the horizon is a new dawn, and that the 2030 agenda creates this magical formula for us for leaving no one behind. And if we take that seriously, if we take that mantra seriously, then the opportunities for persons with disability ahead of us can be bright. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before you leave, I will just ask for one question. You spoke about the economic opportunity and the family. How can developing countries, get on the opportunity of creating the facilities needed for people with disabilities to attract them to their destinations? And is there any preparation to pursue that in the very near future?
Thank you. I think that in terms of my part of the world, the Caribbean, that the answer to that lies in what I just said. Our main industry is tourism. Our linkage between developed countries and developing countries is about the wealthy people in developed countries coming to our islands to build hotels. And therefore, every accommodation built should be built with the facilities to accommodate persons with disability. And we should, in the developing country, our role is to make legislation to make it happen. As we partner with the rich persons from developed societies who come to our countries to build hotels. My country just built its new airport, and it's totally accessible. My Prime Minister makes a joke to say it even has a place where our guide dogs can be taken easily, because it's a fact. And it was built with support from a developed society, a developed country. China helped us in building this. So it is that partnership between developed and developing societies that we have to continue to expand on, and using the inputs of my good colleague or colleague here from Hilton. That's the message.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Just as a quick reminder, this panel is broadcasted around the world and as well as through the web on webtv.un.org. Please, for those who are using Twitter, the hashtags are IDPD, and another hashtag is Future Societies with number 4 all. Future Societies for all. Thank you. And now we move ahead with our panelists. Mr. Grimaldi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for putting together this important conference. You know, the City of New York last year hosted more than 60 million visitors from around the world, 13 million or so from the international community and the balance domestically. This year we're on par to host nearly 62 million, and our visitors add to the vibrancy of the city, and they contribute to employment here. And their economic impact is second to none. $41 billion in direct spending, $61 billion in economic impact. That's an enormous amount of jobs and taxes. There are 383,000 jobs in the tourism sector in New York across a broad spectrum with an average wage of about $60,000. Which beats a lot of the other sectors that are in the New York City economy. In terms of its importance, those jobs need to be filled, and they're good ladders up to a career in tourism in terms of moving folks from entry-level positions to middle management and then senior positions. The city has done a good job of educating youth at the high school level through career technical education. There are roughly 1,300 students enrolled now with a hospitality focus, and giving them content that includes issues of accessibility and putting them in the community and getting them to learn more about the needs of our guests. You have a guest, and that guest has a great experience, and they return to their home nation, and they are the best marketing tool that you have, because they tell 2 people who tell 2 people who tell 10 people. And that's generally how we do it here. NYC & Company is structured as a public-private partnership. We're a traditional trade association, a destination marketing organization. We have a contract to provide the city a certain amount of tourism marketing services, and we work with partners like Commissioner Kalise's office on things like the accessibility guide. Victor was critical in helping NYC & Company in terms of content development for our website and our digital platforms, and getting the accessibility information front and center. In preparing for this conference, we triaged our website and we pulled up a few hotel listings, and one of them we pulled up, and front and center are all the accessibility options that are available to the guest. And with the growth of the hotel sector in this city, we've added more hotel rooms in the city of New York since 2007 than is currently housed in the city of San Francisco. some 40,000 units in the last 10 years. So by the end of this year, there will be 120,000 units in active inventory. And our partners in the hotel community have been great, and the new properties that have come online are really state-of-the-art. So again, thank you for putting this together, and I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we move to Daniela Foster from Hilton Worldwide.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I have to say I've been listening to the sessions, and I'm so inspired, and so many of the things that I want to talk about, now I want to talk about different things with you all. As I was coming today, and I've been here many times before, one of the things that I was thinking about is how interconnected our societies are today, how travel is a powerful tool. And in particular, it's a powerful tool for people-to-people connections and building mutual understanding and inclusion. And I think building mutual understanding really is at the heart of so much of what we're talking about today, because that's part of how we foster a more inclusive economy. So at Hilton, I'm one of over 350,000 team members around the world that works for Hilton. We're in over 105 countries, and one of the things that I'm always thinking about, and that I know our teams are always thinking about, is that the success of our business is completely linked to the success of our local communities. So when a property is in a community, it's part of an entire ecosystem. It's not just sort of a temporary accommodation. We are there and invested. And so I think we see that across the board, from the local owners that we partner with to build our hotels, to the local talent that we work with that helps to make the hotel operate, to the local communities and the businesses we support through our supply chain, and through to the guests that we serve. It's all part of a value chain in an ecosystem. And I think that's incredibly important, because all of us in this room here today, we're all part of an ecosystem of travel and tourism in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's how you got here today, whether it's where you're going to tomorrow, we are all part of this ecosystem. So I firmly believe that fostering a more inclusive economy is intricately linked to sustainable and responsible travel and tourism. So there are so many issues that I could talk to you about today, but there's one I just want to start to hone in on, and that's this issue of unemployment, and in particular youth unemployment. So by 2027, if we just look at the numbers, the travel and tourism industry is projected to support 380 million, that's 380 million jobs globally. That's one of 9 jobs. It's the world's largest employer. Just think about that for a second. And 86 million new jobs that do not exist today, will be added to the global economy in less than a decade. Now, if you take that and contrast that with another trend that's happening simultaneously, and that is youth unemployment. Youth today account for over half of the world's population. It's the largest generation in human history, but they also have another unenviable record, and that is that they're facing the highest unemployment rate in history. It's an astonishing 71 million young people that are looking for work. And we know that many young people today don't have the minimum basic skills that they need to be gainfully employed. We also know that young people are 3 times more likely to be unemployed than adults. And when you look at vulnerable populations, of course, those numbers are going to increase. So what are we thinking about here? You know, from Hilton's perspective, we firmly believe that we have an obligation and a business interest to invest in today's youth. And we've been taking this seriously, so just a couple of things on our radar. In 2014, we committed to connect, prepare, or employ 1 million young people by 2019. It's been keeping us busy. We've reached 700,000 young people to date, and increasingly we are focused on vulnerable populations. So persons with disabilities, we have a number of programs to bring persons with disabilities into the workforce and into the fold, women and girls, the list goes on and on. I'm going to stop there today for right now, but I do want to say I think the travel and tourism industry is incredibly powerful because from our perspective in the hospitality sector, we're flexible on how people get to us. So the barrier to entry to come into hospitality is really low, and we're doing everything that we can to close that gap. So I'm going to stop there for now because there's so many other things we could talk about.
Tui, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'd also like to give thanks to those who gave prayer and blessings to open our session today, and to the Indigenous peoples of these lands, and to our hosts. It's a pleasure to be here, a humbling pleasure to be here today. I've come all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I haven't been here 24 hours, and I've already met some very phenomenal people committed to the development goals alongside many of us, so thank you very much. I'll start out by talking a little bit about Native XP. It is a global Indigenous tourism initiative. So you can go on to gonativexp.com and book Indigenous authentic experiences. So we came up with this concept largely because of a need to end poverty within our communities. I come from the far north of New Zealand, one of the most marginalised Indigenous communities, and within our wider organisation we run a charter school and 6 early childhood centres. So on a day-to-day basis we have around 400 children all running around us, and they are a reminder to us that we need to lift our people from poverty. So our co-founding team are made up 100% Indigenous. We're also 50% women and 66 or so % youth. So 2 also of our most senior positions are held by women, Indigenous women. Part also of been considering the development goals. The online platform ensures the free, prior and informed consent of Indigenous peoples in their engagement. We also encourage the respect, protection and promotion of traditional knowledge, and are embedding those authentic, appropriate policies within the engagement of the platform. We just launched on October 28th, so not even 2 months old yet, and we've already had a phenomenal amount of interest from Indigenous hosts from over 20 different countries. So right now we are working on partnerships, regional partnerships and in-country partnerships, because we really need to ensure that we're supporting our hosts appropriately, that they still need to go through a registration process to ensure that they're providing amazing experiences. And so we're doing that with partners such as Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, RIPON in Russia, who represent all the Indigenous peoples across Russia. But perhaps I'll talk a little bit more about that as I'm looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now to Clark Stevens, Airbnb. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for everyone for being here today. Thank you for the invitation to participate. It's wonderful to be talking about these important issues with such an esteemed group. For those who don't know, Airbnb is a platform that allows you to share the home in which you live. In the last 9 years since it was created, it has listings in 191 countries around the world, 65,000 cities. We obviously are very excited and focused on the opportunity that tourism provides, not only because it's our focus, but more because it provides such an incredible economic opportunity for so many people all around the world. We've heard from many different people today about the power of tourism. It is 10% of the global GDP. It is something that is growing. Not only is it growing, however, and the opportunity that provides, that growth is outsized in emerging economies. It's growing twice as fast, according to UNWTO, in emerging economies than it is in developed economies. What does that mean for Airbnb? We've done a series of studies, and in fact, just this week released a new study that showed by 2030, 400 million international travelers will travel to emerging economies on Airbnb. They'll stay with 28 million hosts in those countries. When you add to that the fact that the host, an Airbnb host keeps 97% of the listing price that they charge, there's an incredible economic opportunity taking place in those communities all around the world. And we really want to make sure that as tourism grows, all of these communities and economies can continue to benefit in a way that ensures that tourism is good for everybody. It's inclusive. It's raising the bar for many people who, frankly, historically have not been able to benefit from tourism. Being able to take money and put it towards things like housing and other ordinary costs that people deal with every day. So we're very focused about that and very excited to be talking about that today. I also just want to say that we've seen incredible growth as it relates to people over 60. That's our fastest growing group of hosts on the platform. And since our founding, women have earned over $10 billion on Airbnb, supporting more than 50,000 female entrepreneurs. That's an area we've been particularly focused in places like India and Africa, working particularly close with certain partners there. I'll stop there and look forward to the conversation. We can talk more about how we're having an impact.
Thank you, Clark. And now, Lynn, please, the voice of reason and academia.
I'll do my best. Thank you very much once again. It's a pleasure being here. Congratulations to the organizers. This is a very important topic for us at NYU, obviously because our students are part of the next group of professionals that will enter this industry. For them, many of them are in the room actually today. For them, these goals are very much ingrained in how they look at the world. So it's great to see that it's much more embedded in their thinking than it has been in previous generations. On a personal level, I think it's a great pleasure to be here because this has always been my research focus. I want to make one very quick point is that not only should we look at the economic benefits of tourism and the integration of people into the workforce, there's also a social benefit to tourism. Traveling is so much part of what makes you an active member of society, that being excluded from that because either you can't get around easily or you have an illness or maybe you just don't have a lot of money feels very isolating. And there's a lot of great initiatives that maybe we'll come to later that can help overcome that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is all very compelling numbers. Numbers not only in the millions or hundreds of millions, but in the billions of dollars. This sphere that the tourism industry operates is a truly global. The opportunities it creates, it's real. It's not only directed towards the tourism establishments, whether it is a hotel or transportation, but it goes across the various segments of the society. If we look to any resort operating in anywhere, you will find that from the farmer in the fields to the high-tech company benefit from the existence of this enterprise. And now with the new economy and the new technology of Airbnb and the diversification of the tourism product, we have now the indigenous experiences, and it was an information for me that expands to 20 different countries. The amount of opportunity is immense. With this backdrop, I will start asking our panelists, how can inclusive and accessible tourism, and let me highlight accessible tourism, help towards contributing towards the strengthening of resilience of people living in poverty, if we are aiming to eradicate poverty, and those vulnerable situations around the world, not only in New York City, not only in Paris, but around the world. I will start with Lynn, please give me your perspective on that.
Of course, thank you. So first of all, the visitor who's looking for an accessible tourism product is often a very loyal visitor. I'm often a little bit worried that we represent them as very high spending. Not everyone is, unfortunately. Some people with disabilities have a lot of resources, others do not. But what we do know is that they want to spend their resources on travel, and once they find a provider that they like, they tend to go back to that same provider time and time again. And they tend to also be very vocal and tell other people about the tourism providers that do a good job. So just in terms of building a loyal customer base and a customer base that is new, that is not going to run to the latest new thing every time, is an incredible benefit for destinations and businesses.
Let me try to get a destination perspective. Brian, New York City is one of the top ranked tourist destinations around the world. There was actually a couple of days ago, there was a report that even the Broadway theaters are becoming now accessible for the visually and hearing impaired. Yes. How can New York City expand on the opportunities to include much more segments, 60 million visitors and 383,000 jobs? I see it as quite modest. Could it be 1 million or 500,000?
It could be if it's done responsibly. Responsible, sustainable tourism is a goal of the city, and it's where we're moving our focus of our energies over the next years and decades. Part of what is important is to make a destination inclusive and accessible for tourists. It first needs to be accessible and inclusive to its residents. And you heard Commissioner Calise say before that fully 10% of New York City residents are dealing with some form of disability. And the city has done a really good job over time, and particularly this administration, and being so inclusive and bringing some of the equality issues to the forefront, are making investments. And those investments that they're making are open to all. And that's really what's important, because no one's getting left behind in this conversation. And in New York City, if you looked at it 20 years ago, there was from a content perspective, it was focused primarily on the Midtown core. And most people came to New York and they visited Times Square and they went to the Statue of Liberty and they saw things that were here. What we're seeing and what we're starting to develop now are more opportunities in further destinations, creating compression outside the Midtown core. So in areas like Jamaica and the North Shore of Staten Island and places in the Bronx, to give folks the opportunity to have some scale when they go to these places that may take some time to get to if they're on a limited itinerary. So if you have a half a day and you know that you'll be able to do shopping and dining and culture, you'll be more adept to get onto our 24-hour subway system to be able to get out to the Bronx or Staten Island or some further reaching place.
Daniela, as a hotel operator, lots of the international chains have catered for the accessible market for many years. But as I believe one of our guests here today mentioned, that there is a stigma around the rooms that it is fitted for accessibility. How can a hotel operator go above this and become more receptive? Since a company, as I will use as an example, Hilton operates in almost every country in the world. There is always a Hilton. How can this, what you have in the developed market, be transferred into the developing countries and the receptive destinations?
Yeah, so I think there's a few different components of that. I mean, so much of what we're talking about here is partially behavioral change. I think it's partially, a new social contract in terms of the way that we operate as we grow. And, like I said before, I think responsible and sustainable tourism is key. I think that has to be the future for tourism, period, going forward. And one of the things that I'm reminded of is that, we actually recently launched the Hilton Africa Growth Initiative, which is a $50 million investment over the next 5 years towards continued expansion in sub-Saharan Africa. And, the key here, and, a lot of what we've been talking about is sustainable growth, right? So how do you, from the beginning, as you grow, think about these issues, thinking about issues of accessibility, thinking about issues of information, thinking about issues around awareness? I think so much of what we're talking about on this issue is really raising awareness. And, another example of that can be through innovation and technology. So we're constantly innovating and thinking about what's next. And one, really cool example of that also gets at the heart of what we're talking about through accessibility is something that we call Connected Room, and we're piloting that right now, and we hope to roll it out globally. And that essentially empowers all of us, any of us who are a guest at one of our properties, to go into the room and to tailor it to what you need, to tailor it to the room temperature that you need, to upload either everything as simple as your songs, but on through to some of the more technical things you need. It essentially gives you the tool as the consumer to do with it what you want. And so I do think as we move towards some of these technological solutions, we're going to get not only at accessibility issues, but you're also going to start raising awareness of how these should be built and baked into the design, right? It shouldn't just be your one room. It should be a part of how you build going forward. So that's definitely something that we're looking about and something I'm very excited about.
Okay, with brick-and-mortar hotel operators, it's easy to put a plan, put a unified designs, or adjust your designs to fit a certain niche and certain needs for groups of people. What about the new economy, the host concept like an Airbnb or in the indigenous platform? How can you control these inputs and make the host residences more accessible unless it was designed from the beginning for a person who needs accessibility?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, all of this goes back to the exciting opportunity the technology is providing. It's bringing new types of opportunities into the travel sector in a way that allows many different people to benefit who traditionally weren't able to benefit directly from that. I think specifically as it relates to accessibility and other issues like that, our focus really is on education and clear communication and making sure that people who are traveling are able to communicate their needs and understand what those needs are. But I think another important opportunity in this space is the economic opportunity provided to people with disabilities who are hosting. There's a growing community of people around the world who are able to host on platforms like Accommable, platforms like Airbnb, and allow themselves to now become beneficiaries of this growing tourism sector. That's not only true in this space, but also in rural communities and places where there have not always been traditional accommodations, but local people are able to now receive visitors into their home and make additional income as a result of that. So I think as we look at this, we really want to be flexible and thinking about how we can make sure that not only are we addressing needs, many different types of needs, but we're also ensuring that the benefits really are felt in many different communities, many of which traditionally haven't been able to feel those benefits.
Thank you, Clark. What about you, Tui, and the indigenous module?
Yes, in regards to resilience, there's already existing studies that talk about how indigenous tourism provides for low economic leakages, much like Clark was talking about with Airbnb. And it also encourages cross-cultural understandings in the building of that. So in considering those things, I've also been looking a lot at our Indigenous hosts, and a lot of them around the world it's very quite ad hoc. You'll find some of them on Instagram, and you'll find some of them on have web pages, and some are on Facebook. And what we're able to do now with our Native XP is to bring everybody together as a community of Indigenous tourism providers, so that we can start to discuss what is it that we need to for our communities, and what will strengthen and promote the voice of Indigenous tourism. So I think it can be demonstrated on multiple levels, not only as being Indigenous hosts and contributing to ending poverty within communities, security of land tenure as well, which is very important to Indigenous peoples, but also that we can consider it in a wider sense of building that voice of Indigenous peoples and really bringing change around the industry.
Thank you, Tui. Always a question comes to the capital and the availability of capital and the use of capital. So my next question is that how can we operate responsible investment policies that can create sustainable communities, accessible, inclusive, equitable, with potential for development, both in human capital and in physical material. So I have this question across the board for our panelists. Daniela, would you like to start on that track?
Sure, happy to. So I'm also going to put my public-private partnership hat on. I mean, I worked in government and diplomacy and with the UN for many, many years. And I think, the beauty of the Sustainable Development Goals is that they've set out a framework and a new way for us all to really do business. I think that the issues that we're all trying to get at, whether it's sustainable travel and tourism or inclusivity or decent work and economic growth, these are not things that any of us can do on our own individually. They're things that we all have to partner to do together. And I think when you start with that in mind, and when you start with what I like to call a value chain approach in mind, that's where you're going to start to see some of these changes. So as I look at our strategy and where we invest on the travel with purpose side, which is our corporate responsibility strategy, we look across 3 different core areas. So from a value chain approach, we'll say, okay, what can we do from the hotel side? What can we do within our own operations and within our team members? And then we look at what can we do with guests. So hotels and guests is sort of one big piece of this value chain. And then we say, okay, what can we do within our communities? What are the key, most urgent issues? And, how can we move the dial on those, whether they're environmental, economic, and social, or dealing with young people and economic opportunity? And then we look at our supply chain. I think one of the biggest areas around investment that we actually haven't talked about here is supply chains. Supply chains is really where you have some major opportunity to look at diversity and inclusion and to really expand economic opportunities for people. We have a massive supply chain, and a number of other companies and organizations and governments are in our supply chain, and we're in theirs, and vice versa. So I think this becomes another powerful way to look and think about investment. And when you start to have those value chain conversations from the front end as you're looking at investments, that's where you start to move the dial on a lot of these key issues. And I think even on the Sustainable Development Goals, and on SDG 1 and all of the others we're talking about, you have to start from the design side with a value chain approach.
Lynn, please.
It's probably a bit self-serving, but I think there's a role for the universities in here too. Very often research is a key part of understanding both communities, and I particularly think of big companies like Hilton or even Airbnb that operate in so many environments. It can be tempting to try and apply a one-size-fits-all, which I'm sure neither of you are actually doing, but understanding the local environment is so important, and universities want to partner with business, and our students want to see how what they learn in class really transfers to what the real world is doing. So I think the role of universities shouldn't be underestimated here.
Definitely the role of research and and academia is always the backbone, and always take the initiative in creating the overture for further enhancement. I'll take on this theme, and I'll borrow from our previous panelists, the area of collaboration. and the need to be more inclusive. You mentioned academia, private sector, public-private partnership, indigenous societies. On collaboration, do we need new legislations, or do we need to work within the existing legal frameworks? And do we have enough protections for the vulnerable segments in the societies, or do we need to do more? Perhaps, Clark, since your company works directly with the providers in this case.
Sure. I mean, our approach really has been to find local partners that are connected to those communities and bring our information to the table as an equal partner, but learn from them as well. So, for example, we've partnered with the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, holding trainings for rural working women across the country, basically helping them learn how to become an Airbnb host. People know a lot about hospitality. They don't always know how to use, the app on their phone on how to become a host easily. And so we've held a series of trainings through that partnership, and now have actual members of SEWA with their listings up on Airbnb earning additional income. We've done a similar partnership with Open Africa in the Western Cape. In South Africa, training women again, very similar, how to use the platform, how to become a host, what are the best practices. And, we've really seen those not only have a great effect, but also really be a wonderful learning for us about the ways in which we can work closely with local organizations to make sure that impact is really, felt in a variety of places.
Brian, when we come to legislation, as your organization is the public-private partnership, do you see the industry in New York City regulated or over-regulated at this point? Because it was just started a few years back that, for example, tour guides had to have a licensing system. Before, anybody can just go and play tour guide regardless of the information and its accuracy given. What about the other segments? Transportation, which is a major component of the industry, culinary establishment and restaurants, etc. In going down the chain, how important is to work with the existing legislation or move forward with proposing new laws to be in place?
Thank you. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, with any legislation, it's a double-edged sword, right? So it's almost like a recipe, just a pinch will do. In terms of some of the recent legislation that the city's put out, the growth in tourism here over a particularly short period of time, going to 60 million tourists, last year from a base of 36 million just 10 years ago. That's incredible growth that needs to be managed. And one of the ways that it is managed is through legislation. Regulation of the roads, regulations of the certain segments like restaurants as they pop up fairly frequently. But in a balanced approach. In a balanced approach to make sure that we're not constraining the private investment in a way that it's not incentivized to continue investing.
Tui, would you like to?
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a few points as well. So like I said, I've only been in New York for less than 24 hours, but I did manage to meet up with some local Indigenous peoples that I know and learnt about some potential New York experiences. There are guides that can take people around the museums. There is talk about an Indigenous restaurant. There could be places where you could go to a market and purchase Indigenous food. So after tonight and over the weekend, I'll be sitting with them and talking more about the potential for them to come on board as well. And we need to do that to partner as well. As I said earlier, we've partnered with Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. Some of you here at the UN will likely know about them. They work in 40 different countries across Asia, particularly in Indigenous communities. with Ripon in Russia, who represent 270,000 indigenous Russians across 60% of the territories of Russia. Here this weekend, hoping to confirm our North American partner, and largely again because we not only need our Indigenous hosts to understand the technology about how to sign up to be a host, but we also really want them to be providing amazing experiences that they're sustainable, as well as that they can be successful business people. And we understand that everybody's success will be a huge part of the journey.
Thank you. Now we come to 10 minutes before our closing for this session, and we would like to open the floor for your questions, and me and the panelists would love to answer. Director Bass, please.
As a beneficiary of tourism, because my travel implies lots of traveling, so there is also the congressional tourism. There are many kinds of tourism. And also as a person with a disability, so I also look at it from another perspective when I travel for pleasure. I want to thank all the panelists for their contribution. I would like also allow me to thank my team. They have done an amazing job, including Cosmas, who called Professor Anderson saying, try to make it not too boring, and many others, Melissa and Robert and others. So thank you very much for this job that you have done so far. The topic of this afternoon was brought to the attention of the audience and also the panelists with the idea to encourage multi-stakeholder partnerships to positively impact the prosperity and the well-being of vulnerable communities living in urban areas in order to build the future societies for all we want, that are inclusive and that also promote resilience. And we focused with this second panel on one of the many groups that can contribute by working together with city leaders or leaders of urban areas, how the private sector and the public sector together can work, and how, for instance, the industry of tourism and all the services and products that it provides, not only hotels, restaurants, parks, leisure areas where you have spend your leisure time, etc., how all of this actually can contribute to the well-being of communities and the well-being of vulnerable groups. Because in order to welcome tourists, also the tourism industry somehow promotes and provides infrastructures that make the offers of their products accessible to all. So this was the idea, and we heard many different good practices in the afternoon here. So I would like to thank you all for this. Therefore, to move towards inclusive and accessible and resilient societies for the future we want for everybody, we noticed and we understood that tourism and good industry practices of tourism can fulfill the needs of tourists, but also of host communities addressing the social problems. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to launch here an idea that maybe this could be one of a series of events we might wish to organize towards the topic by looking at it from different angles, because like Daniela, me only one L, two L's, I know, and other panelists said, we're just mentioning very few areas of the very complex topic we wanted to start tackling today. And the UN is the platform. It's the forum where we can gather together and partner Goal 17. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Bass. And we move with our Q&A. The lady.
Thank you very much. My name is Kyra Eubanks, and I'm a 22-year-old youth intern here at the New Future Foundation here at the United Nations. And the question I have is, what are examples of training that focus on young people? And also, how can we invest, how can young people contribute to the investment within the tourism sector? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Perhaps Daniela would take the lead on this one.
Happy to. So, a couple of points on this. So I was actually here at the UN for the UN Youth Assembly, and one of the things that I did here was to preview the 2017 Global Youth Wellbeing Index. And it's an index that looks holistically across youth well-being, everything from health and well-being to safety and security to technology connectedness, economic opportunity, education, the whole holistic aspects of well-being. And one of the top line things that came out of that is that young people are more technologically connected than they've ever been in history. They're also more educated than they've ever been in history, but they are simultaneously more disconnected to public institutions, to formal economic opportunities, to industries, things of that nature. And so what I think this highlights is that all of us up here on the panel in some way, shape, or form have a role to play in engaging young people in travel and tourism. So the reality is we know there's plenty of jobs out there. The gap is usually young people don't know what those are. So part of what we've done at Hilton is we have sort of a 3-point way that we engage young people. We connect them. So we connect them with career pathways so they know what a role or a future in hospitality, travel, and tourism could look like. We prepare them. So we have a partnership with International Youth Foundation, and we have a program called Passport to Success. We offer it globally around the world. It provides foundational soft and life skills training for young people so that they're ready to enter the workforce. And then we employ young people. We do that through apprenticeships. We do it through internships. We do it through formal employment. We also employ veterans, persons with disabilities. The diversity piece for us is huge. It's something we're very focused on. So there's a ton of resources out there, but I do think these forums are important because the connecting piece and the raising awareness is really key. I think there's just not a broad understanding for young people of what the opportunities look like in the industry.
Thank you, Daniela. Clark, can you please give us your perspective on this, the training and creating jobs for the young people?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that's frankly really exciting about millennials is their interest in travel. Part of the reason travel is growing is because millennials would rather spend their money on experiences than things. And in fact, not just experiences, but authentic experiences. And that is what's so at the heart of this opportunity. It's not just traveling to a place, it's traveling to a place and seeing it how someone who lives there sees it, and really understanding the fabric of the community. And that's what we're so excited about, and the opportunity that we see through through new technologies and new platforms. You can go and not only see a city, you can see it as a local does, and you can actually understand the person who lives there and break down some of the barriers that all of us hope to break down through these conversations. So I think not really an answer to your question, but I think the opportunity that millennials provide and the trend that they're setting is really, it's an optimistic thing to be looking at, and I think creates an opportunity for all of us to really focus in on how that travel can happen sustainably and in a positive way.
Thank you, Clark. As Director Bash said, this is just a start of a long path, and it opens a lots of areas that we can further explore in details, whether through another sessions or even a dedicated multi-day conference in this regard. With this note, I wish to thank my panelists, and I wish to thank DESA and Director Daniela Paz and her wonderful team to all the hard work and details they have managed to iron and provide the best possible outcome through a lengthy day started from this morning. And thank all of you for being with us for the afternoon session. Thank you.